You want answers?
I think I'm entitled to.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. What do we all face in sales? We face rejection. We face hard times. We face the roller coaster of the quarter, of the month, where we have not enough leads, where we're trying to close deals, where we get rejection, where we get criticized and ridiculed, where we're constantly up against insurmountable odds to become successful in sales. So what do we have to do? We have to have a mindset. We have to get psyched up. And I basically got the author of a new book, Getting Psyched. Get psyched up. Yeah, we have to control our focus and our mindset. We have to do this to become successful. And it really differentiates the people who do become successful from the ones who don't. And the mistake that we make is, when I become successful, I'll have that mindset. I'll have that view of the world. But we don't. We learn this as kids. Typically, for guys, it's about sports, where the coach has rituals of how to get the team excited and focused. But also in academia, before a test, you study, you get focused, you prepare, you have repetition, you have a system that you go through. And as adults, we tend to lose this. We tend to miss out on this. We tend to forget this. And we think that we are these machines, but the machines that we are run on software. And the software is basically our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our chemistry that's going through our brain. And there's ways of managing that. So I got the author of this new book. I've been listening to it on Audible. You can get it free on Audible. The link is in the show notes. It's, I think, audible.com/brutaltruth. You get a free month. Also, I really like it because it's a practical approach. It's not a recipe. It's more of a social science view of it and showing you examples of how you do it. And then really the top three things we want to talk about. We got anxiety, number one. And that's, we get call reluctance, we get fear, we get concern about losing a deal, about being judged, about not being competent at something. And we got to be able to manage this. And this number two is confidence. We have to have that confidence, that reassurance that we are good at this, that we are going to capture that deal. And number three is we got to have energy. Anybody lose a little energy around Friday or 4 o'clock? Yeah, all of these three things. And we have to build this into our model. I don't talk enough about this because, I've kind of come up with my own recipe. I used to, on my fingers, before a sales call, I used to go positive, relaxed, confident, aggressive. And I do it over and that was my recipe for a sales call. Also, I used to do those Tony Robbins wow claps. Check that out on YouTube. Also, power positions, putting your hands above your head or putting your head up against, or not up against, but looking up at the sky or the ceiling and putting a big smile because your body follows your physiology. We're going to get into a lot of this. And what I really want you to do is build this into your day, your call strategy, and into your life. Make it part of your success routine. So let's get into the interview. But before I do that, I want to tell you about Co-Video. I've been using Co-Video as a way of sending video emails, as a way of connecting with people. Because the word emails, and certainly HTML emails, are dead. Word emails are good, but once you get to know somebody, you want to express a message that might be not read. Video, people watch it. People are intrigued. It's new, it's surprising. And what Co-Video does, it makes it super simple to do. Co-Video, video.com. Check it out. I'm really liking it. It gets traceability and everything. Keeps track of who opens it and how much they watch of it. All of that's fantastic. Check it out. I put it in the show notes. I talked to the CEO. He's super psyched to get on the podcast and share how salespeople are using video today to get more meetings, to get more introductions, to be able to communicate their ideas. Let's get into the interview and get psyched. Come on. Hey, Dan, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a senior editor at Harvard Business Review, a big magazine in Boston. I've worked there for 7 years. Before that, I spent almost 20 years as a magazine reporter, mostly for Newsweek magazine in New York.
And how'd you get interested in this topic?
So some of it dates back to high school. I was a football and basketball player on the high school teams. I was never particularly great at either sport, but I became fascinated by the things that the coaches would do before the games to try to get us pumped up, the music, the pep talks, the rituals, the superstitions, and that carried through into my adult life. And when I got to Harvard, I started seeing actual academic research about things people do in the workplace before they perform, and it seemed a natural topic to explore in a book.
And have you, extended this from high school? I mean, yeah, I certainly remember that. And I didn't do football, but cross country and stuff. And there was, certainly the music, the camaraderie, the ranting and raving. But once you become, go to college and you get a job, everyone kind of thinks of us as more, professional. It doesn't seem professional.
Right. Well, at least a couple things happened. Number one, occasionally I would run into professional people. Two in particular jump out. One was a neurosurgeon, and the other was a big accounting partner at one of the big firms. And they were both former athletes in high school and college. And each of them described to me how the things they would do before the important professional events they have, whether it's doing brain surgery or presenting to a big board of directors, which the accountant does regularly, they would go through a process that was a lot like getting psyched up for a wrestling match or a football game. So I did run into people who were using this kind of thing. And the other thing is, you run into sports psychologists a lot who typically work with big time athletes, but on the side, a lot of them will also work with executives. Now, there's not a lot of people doing this, but it showed that there really is a carryover of the same techniques that work for Michael Phelps can work for somebody who has to pitch VCs or somebody who's going into a sales call or a job interview. Getting yourself mentally prepared to perform in this economy can work for everybody.
And what is the process, and what would you recommend people do, especially like salespeople? The salespeople, because it's all this roller coaster and it's, 95% rejection. It really takes its toll on people.
Yeah, so here's the top line. And I'll admit I went into this with a very simplistic view, which turned out not to be correct. If you go back to what you were doing before your high school cross-country meets and what I was doing before my high school football games, a lot of that was really focused on building up our adrenaline and getting us highly energized. Think of it like flipping a light switch to the on position. That's what simplistic sort of high school sports getting psyched up was about. Once you actually start reading the research and talking to professionals and figuring out exactly what works and what doesn't, I came to view it a lot less as a light switch and much more like a stereo dial with different knobs on it. And three knobs in particular are what I try to think about manipulating. Number one is anxiety. You want to try to crank anxiety down as low as you can, trying to sort of manage the physical manifestation of being afraid in that setting, which is kind of normal. Number two, try to find ways to dial your confidence level up. Generally speaking, if you go into one of these events feeling highly confident, you're going to do better. And then number three is energy level. If you are, going to be powerlifting or wrestling or something that's, super physical, super short-term burst of energy, that requires one kind of energy level. Even if you're giving a speech, if you're giving a talk to 10 people or you're giving a talk to 150 people, you need to get different energy levels for those kind of things. So thinking about calibrating your energy to make it appropriate to what you're about to do. Those are the three dials I think about. And then there's a lot of techniques you can use depending on which one you want to focus on.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one, anxiety, because salespeople, we call it call reluctance, whether it's the phone, in person, presentations. It's scary, that picking up the phone or walking up in front of people or knocking on a door, whatever it turns out to be. What's worked for me, and maybe you can tell me what works for you, is breathing. That's what I've kind of found to reduce anxiety. Is that the most effective thing, or?
So that's absolutely an important one for many people. One of the most interesting days I spent when I was reporting the book was down at the Juilliard School in New York City, where they teach classical musicians. And if you go to the Juilliard School, you spend a lot of time in class learning to play your instrument better. But they also have a semester-long course, a psychology course, that's not about playing your instrument. It's about how to handle the emotions before you audition, how to deal with these nerves. And one of the most important techniques they teach teach in that course is called centering, which is very much a breathing and visualization kind of exercise. So that's absolutely one thing you can do to try to tamp down the physical sensations of being nervous. One of the other ones that I talk about in the book is called reappraisal. And it sounds like a very subtle technique, but it's basically about the idea that if you feel nervous or you feel anxious, in a perfect world, it might be great to feel calm, to go from like that 10 level of agitation down to a 0. The reality is it's hard to do that. We are biologically programmed to feel nerves and anxiety if we feel threatened. So instead of trying to go from 10 to 0, try to shift from negative feelings like anxiety and nervousness over to excitement, which is a more positive but still sort of highly energized kind of emotion. So it's a subtle shift, but they've actually done studies of people before they give presentations or before they sing, where they have one group of people say, "I'm so nervous," and another group of people say, "I'm so excited." And just that simple difference can make you perform better.
Yeah. And in sales, that's the difference between focusing on the commission check versus getting fired. And what happens is sales reps are either in one of those two states, and it's the ones that are focusing on, blowing their number away that turn that anxiety into desire. And I guess, they call that reframing and NLP. And I think a lot of people have different names for it. How about the use of flow and the research there? Did you leverage that?
So when you think of a flow state, you think of getting so absorbed in an activity at which you feel very competent that you lose track of time. You just sort of become locked in. You become kind of impervious to distractions. That's partly a function of making sure that you're doing the right kind of work. It's also about making sure that you enter into that task with a very high level of confidence. And that's really the second dial that I think about kind of tweaking. And there's a few different things you can do to try to boost your confidence level. You can do sort of visualization exercises where you visualize yourself in the future making that sales call or giving that presentation and having it go very, very well. Lots of athletes do that. There's a lot of research that can be highly effective. I'll tell you, for me personally, rather than look forward and try to imagine myself doing well, I actually do better if in those final moments before I do something performance related, I look backwards and try to focus very vividly on a time when I did that activity very, very well and do everything I can to recollect it. So before I come on a podcast like yours today, I'll go back and listen to myself on the radio from a couple of years ago or on a podcast that I did a long time ago where I just had an unusually good day or where the editing was especially smooth. They made me sound a little bit better than I really sound in real life. And I'll just take 2 or 3 minutes and listen to that. And it makes me sort of recognize, hey, when I have a good day, I can really be good at this. And it sort of primes me and puts me in the state of mind where I'm likely to be able to do it again.
Yeah. And do you think that's why people put like their accomplishments on the wall, their degrees, their, press releases, their articles, as kind of a reminder of their skill set?
So I think that's a great idea. I certainly do it myself. So I've never seen research about something hanging on the wall, but there is research that looked at, they went into call centers where people were dialing for donations, and they would separate the fundraisers into different groups. And one group, they would just give a sheet of instructions. The other group, they would give a sheet of instructions with a very sort of triumphant, successful photo at the top. I think it was somebody finishing a marathon with their hands in the air. A very subtle kind of thing. And they wouldn't draw their attention to it. It was just there kind of in the background. And people who were exposed to that visual image raised a lot more money over the course of the shift, and it continued. They didn't think it should work that way, so the researcher tried it in all sorts of different places. He tried it a whole bunch of different ways. So yeah, something as simple as keeping an award on your in your line of sight from your desk. You don't need to necessarily obsess over it or stare at it or anything, but it's there to remind you, hey, I'm an award-winning salesperson. And that stuff is not just about impressing clients. That's about impressing it upon yourself that you're successful in the past and you're going to be successful again today.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. On top of my desk, I have like either the trophies or the awards that I've won in the past. It's been so long that it's kind of ridiculous that they're still there. But it does remind me and anchor me back to those times when you kind of you stood up and you pushed yourself through those difficult times.
So I'll tell you a story that I heard. It's one of my favorite stories I've heard after the book was written during this promotional phase of it. It actually came from a salesperson, and his job involves it's not so much cold calling, it's more by appointment, but his first contact with a potential client takes place over the phone. He's usually doing it from his home office, and in his home office on a shelf he keeps a crown, and it was a crown that was given to him his senior year of high school when he was voted king of the prom. And he said that before important calls, he actually will put the crown on for a couple of minutes. And it sounds like a crazy thing to do, but I said, why do you do that? And he said, well, here's why that crown is so meaningful to me. I moved high schools in my junior year, in the middle of my junior year. So at 17 years old, I had to very quickly get a whole new group of friends and, make relationships and build rapport with them. And just a year later, my senior year, I was, popular enough with them that they voted me the king of the prom. And he's like, that crown reminds me that I'm very likable. I have a unique ability to very quickly connect with people, to build a relationship, to build rapport. And that's really the most important thing I want in terms of confidence when I'm about to make a first sales call. So it's a really kind of ingenious technique to remind him of the skill, which is really at the forefront of his ability, especially in that first call when it's all about building that relationship.
Now, you brought up that winning the marathon, and there was a great TED talk that was super popular about power positions and how it really changed your perspective. And then it was that exact example that you gave, crossing the finish line, hands in the air. And it was some PhD who said that this is a universal positions, meaning that it's independent of culture, language, or time period, that when people achieve something that they have identical postures. Did you do any research into that?
Yeah, so power posing is the original research on that was done by someone named Amy Cuddy at Harvard Business School. And you're right that sort of triumphant winning the marathon hands in the air is one example of power posing. Other examples, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic though. One of the poses that is used in that research is what they call the Wonder Woman pose, which is feet apart, standing up, hands on your hips, chest out. Another one that they used in that research is a very confident chair pose. It was leaning way back in your chair with your arms out and your feet up on your desk. Basically, if you think about it, think if a wild animal was about to attack you. If you're expansive and big, that's kind of a dominant, strong position. If you're defensive and crouched up and making your body tiny and pulling your limbs in, that's a very, defensive, hiding kind of posture. And if you think of power posing, you think of that sort of aggressive, alpha, expansive, taking up lots of space. And the power posing research, they showed that not only did people who use that position before they did an activity take more risks, feel more power, feel more confidence, perform better? They actually tested their saliva and found that their body chemistry was changed by it. They had more testosterone. They had less cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So it's not just changing your psychology, according to this research. It's actually changing your biochemistry.
Yeah, your whole physiology. And if you watch the Animal Channel, when they teach people when a bear attacks you, the worst thing you can do is run. What you're supposed to do is face the bear and be as big and noisy as possible. So it's kind of counterintuitive, as is all of this stuff, because if you're asked how many salespeople really spend any time on this, meaning that they think it should be innate versus something that they learn and a skill that they develop.
Yeah, that's absolutely the point of this, and that's why this book is becoming as popular as it is among salespeople. Which I have to be honest, I didn't necessarily write it for a sales audience. People are finding it organically. I spent some time this morning, coincidentally, on the phone with a team of pharmaceutical sales reps, and one of the things we talked about this morning is that, they have a whole body of knowledge and substantive practice they need to do their jobs well. So they need to know a ton about the biochemistry of their drugs, the interactions, the randomized clinical studies, and why the drug works and why it's better than others. They need to be able to meet objections. They need to be able to answer all sorts of various technical questions. The stuff in my book doesn't have anything to do with that substantive practice kind of stuff. What I argue, though, is that you can know all that stuff cold and have practiced your 10,000 hours, but if 5 minutes before your presentation to the doctor, you get nervous or you're not feeling it or you're worried that you're going to lose the sale and that detracts from your performance, you're going to lose it. So what I'm talking about here is a layer of techniques that you add on top of the actual day-to-day practice you're doing to be able to sell.
And that's it. And if I talk to, I deal with sales leaders all the time, and they'll be interviewing a salesperson, and the feedback you always get is not about their experience, their skill set. It's really how they interacted. Was their palms sweaty? Were they shaking? Were they nervous? Were they arrogant? Were they present? Were they listening? And all of those things we have control over, but we have to proactively, engage. And, especially when, you don't interview every day, right? You might interview, once every 2 years, once, you're either out of work or you're looking for a better job. And to be able to, kind of bring that process together is critical.
Yeah, I agree completely. I've read research from the venture capital industry that shows that VCs are absolutely interested in the substance of the business idea you're pitching. They're absolutely interested in your background and the skills that you and the top team bring. But the thing that really determines whether they want to invest or not is your level of confidence and the way you respond to questions, whether you seem defensive or whether you seem confident and open-minded about the feedback you're getting. So attitude and demeanor and signs of emotional intelligence, those are all really key in these instances in which people are making judgments about other people. And again, substance is necessary, but it's not necessarily enough. It's great if you're a spectacular violin player, but if you get so nervous before an audition that your hands are sweating and that interferes with your ability to put your hands on the strings of the violin, you're not going to play very well. So there's this whole secondary set of techniques to be able to sort of get in the right mindset right before you perform in order to get the full return on your practice.
And let's talk about the third one, energy. I mean, what is your prescription there?
So energy is a little bit more commonsensical than the other two areas. Anxiety is something that if it's a problem for you, you definitely want to learn how to deal with it. Confidence, I think everybody can benefit from being more confident in these kind of situations. And even if you have the anxiety thing settled, you're not very anxious as a person, finding ways to boost your confidence are still probably going to help you. Energy is really about figuring out what level you want to be at. Again, something as simple as the size of the room, the size of the group of people you're going to be talking to. If you talk to a single person during a sales presentation and then transfer and use that same level of energy when you're talking to 25 people, you're probably not going to be energetic enough. So a lot of it is just finding reading the room and being able to prepare for the level of energy you need to bring to it. Imagine yourself if you were presenting to one person every hour on the hour all day long. Well, you can probably do that because, that's a one-on-one interaction. There's only so much energy that requires. Imagine doing that every hour to a large group. You probably couldn't do that. It would just be too energetically draining from you because just speaking to that kind of audience just takes a lot more out of a person. So sort of preparing for the amount of energy. In the same way, if you're standing at the starting line, you damn well better want to know whether you're running a 50-yard dash or a 400 dash because you need to sort of pace yourself and know what you're about to get yourself into. I think of energy the same way.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what would you say to somebody that says, well, I really don't need this. I have this already. I'm psyched up already. Or a manager who says, this seems kind of frou-frou, new age.
Yeah, I guess I would say a couple things. Um, Occasionally I run into people who are very, very experienced in some of these areas, like somebody who's been a professional speaker for 20 years, and they've never read the research on reappraisal, but just naturally and intuitively, after doing this for years and years, they just say, "Oh, well, I always look at an opportunity to speak as something to be excited about." I already do that. So I definitely meet people who sort of say they've sort of stumbled onto some of these techniques themselves just because they do performance kinds of things so often. So there is maybe some truth to that. But I would argue that our jobs are becoming a lot more similar to athletics than most people think. It's not about every hour of every day. It's more about, especially if you're in key account. I have a lot of friends in key account management where there's 3 meetings every quarter that really determine whether or not they make their number, and they cannot afford to mess that meeting up. And it's 3 hours out of the hundreds of hours in that quarter. I think that's sort of like being an NFL quarterback. You've got 16 Sundays a year to earn your livelihood on. And you bet that every professional athlete, every Olympic athlete has spent a little bit of time with a sports psychologist trying to figure out what they should be doing to make sure that on the 16th Sunday, they're not going to screw it up. I think many professions, and sales in particular, can benefit from those kind of tweaks as well.
Yeah, I remember one of my first sales jobs. I was constantly bringing my CEO out because we were doing $500,000, $1 million deals, and he was so charismatic. But in the car, he'd ask me, "What are we going to do?" And I'd say, "Get the order." And we just rant and rave, and we'd go in, and we were unstoppable at that time. And he was an Air Force Academy grad, and he just had that kind of spirit.
But it sounds like what you and your CEO were doing wasn't exactly what I'm talking about in the book in terms of the technique by technique, but it sounds like the two of you came up with your own kind of idiosyncratic process to put your game face on and to pump each other up. And it sounds, you weren't talking about the weather or the Red Sox and then just walking into the room cold. It sounds like you had something that you were doing to make sure that each of you was really in that zone to perform.
Yeah, and believe me, it worked. I mean, this guy was unstoppable in front of people, and was not a trained salesperson, but was just a really passionate, articulate Stanford grad. Now, I look at this book and this process a lot like the checklist Manifesto. I'm not sure if you've read that or not.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, because like surgeons who all that school, all that training, and still want to have a checklist. Why? Because we're human. And we have, in your case, with Psyched Up, it's like we have emotions. We might be having a good day or a bad day. All kinds of garbage is going on in our lives that interfere with what we should be focused on. And if we don't do this, it's going to be too late to think about it after something goes wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And one of the ways to think about this is imagine that you and I were competing for the same job. Let's take it out of a sales context and take it into a job interview kind of situation. Let's say we've each made it through 3 rounds of interviews. The final interview is today, and we're both sitting in the waiting room waiting to go in individually for the final round. And let's say you have a checklist of things you do for those last 10 minutes. It could be listening to a certain set of songs on the car ride in, thinking about your best interview ever, reading something that's very affirming. It could be something superstitious. And let's say that I have nothing to do. I don't have a checklist. I have no process. What am I going to do? Well, I'm probably going to sit there and just worry and be nervous. So there's no question that some of the purpose of the kinds of things we've been talking about, some of these things are not magic. They're about giving you something to do that distracts you from the negative thoughts that are likely to creep in if you have nothing to do in those final moments. So I think the idea of a checklist, that these are the things we want to do before we go into the room, that's one of the purposes it can serve.
Excellent. And what would you say the top 3 things that a sales rep would get out of the book if they listened to it or read it?
I think number one, the idea that it's not just about substance and how well you know the product and how well you close or deal with objections, that there's this secondary set of emotional techniques that can help. That's probably number one. Number two, the set of techniques are going to be different for every person. This is not a super prescriptive book in the sense that it says everybody should do this, everybody should do that. For you, listening to certain songs may be super motivational. For me, thinking about how I want to beat the competition may be motivational. There's a lot of techniques, and it's really about picking and choosing. And then number three, I think somebody who has a plan for these last few minutes is probably on average and over the long term going to outperform somebody who sits there doing nothing or sits there worrying. So having a plan beats not having a plan.
Great. Hey, I got your book off of Audible. I assume it's on Amazon and everywhere else that sells books.
It is.
Yeah. And if people want to follow you personally, what's the best platform?
So I'm on Twitter at Dan McGinn. I'm on LinkedIn, and the book's website is www.psychedupthebook.com.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that and getting psyched up. I think the key is to find your recipe, find your system. Is it music? Is it physical movement? Is it imagery? Is it words? Whatever it is for you. Think of your five senses, visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and see what works for you. Some people like songs. Some people need to go running. Other people just need a picture of the outcome that they want. Whatever works for you, build it into your system. Vary it a little, intensify it, but make it a habit, because this will really change the way you sell. To get into that flow state, you have to initiate it, because we typically have this roller coaster in sales, especially me. It is the most bipolar profession ever, and there's so much is dependent on it, on you being psyched and focused and having the right mindset. So find, one way or three ways to reduce your anxiety, which typically works best is relaxing with breath, focusing on your sweet spot, your calm spot, your happy place, whatever that is. Number two, confidence. What always worked for me is think of yourself twice as big as the other person, then 10 times bigger, then 100 times bigger. Imagine you as the Empire State Building, and all of a sudden everything else turns smaller. Now, I would definitely get this book because it gets you thinking about this. And there's tons of stuff out there, TED Talks, YouTube stuff. But find out what works for you, document it, come up with your recipe, and apply it at least once a day. And then come up with your little system before every face-to-face call, every important demo or conference call, so that you can win the deal. That's what matters, is making more money. Also, check out the show notes. I've got all the links of all the partners of the podcast in there, Nudge, Pipedrive, App2Zen, all of these resources that really are going to take your career to the next level. Make sure you're connecting up with me on LinkedIn. Check out the YouTube channel as well, Maverick Method on YouTube. And I'm still offering the Maverick Selling Method, my book, full format in PDF for free. All you have to do is write a review, not just send me an email. You got to write a review on iTunes, take a little picture of it, email me a picture of it, I reply with the book. Don't just send me an email, say, hey, I like the podcast. That's not a review. The review has to be on iTunes. Connect up with me on LinkedIn. I really appreciate the people who are sharing where they're listening to the podcast on social. I love that. I love to see you lifting weights and driving around, making money. I love to see it. And tell me how a podcast is helping and what you care about, what you want to hear, who you want to hear it from, what issues you're running into, so I can help you find the best people out there for it. I got lots of great episodes. Check out the B2B Revenue Show as well as the Sales Questions podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.
I want to know the truth, because deep down in places that you don't talk about at team and management meetings, you want me on that call. You need me on that call. We use words like fleet view, volume control, total cost of ownership. We use these words as a backbone of a life spent negotiating something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor inclination to explain myself to people who rise and sleep under the very blanket of revenue that I provide and then question the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, may I suggest you pick up a phone and make some sales calls. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you're entitled to.
Did you expense the lap dances?
I did the job I was hired.
Did you expense the lap dances?
You're goddamn right I did!